All right, everybody, get ready because we are diving deep into some pretty thought-provoking ideas.
Yeah.
Ideas about something we see every single day, but don't always, stop and question. We're talking about television. You send in these excerpts from 4 arguments for the elimination of television. And wow, Gerrymander, the author, he does not hold back. He's got some really, really compelling arguments about this technology. And, we often just take it for granted. Think about it for a sec. How many times have you watched like a news segment and felt like, okay, did I just get like the simplified, like G-rated version of the story? Or how often do you catch yourself like unconsciously singing along to a jingle from a commercial? I know I've been there.
You've just hit on exactly what gerrymander wants us to really consider. It's those subtle ways that television really shapes how we see the world, how we see reality. And what I find fascinating is that Mander actually came from the world of advertising. So he really understands how this medium works from the inside out.
Oh, wow. So it's like the insider turned critic.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And one of his core arguments, he talks about this idea of mediation, which basically means, television is like this filter between us and the actual real world. It's controlling what we see, how we see it, even how long we get to see it for. So
Yeah.
it's like instead of directly experiencing, reality, we're getting this curated, this packaged version of it.
It's like trying to understand the ocean by looking at a postcard, right? You're only getting this tiny glimpse and you don't even know if that represents the whole thing.
What a perfect analogy. And Mander, he illustrates this point with this really interesting example, a chimpanzee experiment.
Oh, I haven't heard about this one.
So scientists, they created this artificial environment for chimpanzees. And these chimps could get rewards, food, water, by pressing buttons. Sounds pretty good, eh? Instant gratification right there at your fingertips.
Oh, yeah, sign me up for that, honestly.
Right. But here's the thing. The chimps' whole entire world became limited to just what they could get through those buttons. They got so used to this like mediated experience that they totally lost sight of the bigger picture.
So even though they had their basic needs met, they were still missing out on like, I don't know, like the richness, the complexity of a real unmediated experience.
Exactly. Exactly. And it kind of leads to a really unsettling question. Are we, as viewers, as people who watch TV, are we also kind of limited? Are we so used to experiencing the world through these buttons of our screens that we're missing out on a deeper, more, I don't know, nuanced understanding?
It's a scary thought, especially when you consider how much of our information, our entertainment, even our social interaction now happens through screens.
Right. And look, this isn't to say that television is inherently bad, but Mander wants us to be aware of its limitations, of what he calls its inherent biases. For example, he talks about how TV, even with the best intentions, can sometimes oversimplify things and even distort really complex issues. He tells us this really interesting story about the Hopi tribe and the Black Mesa mine.
Oh, yeah, I read that one. The Hopi tribe, they were fighting against like a mining operation that was happening on their ancestral land, right?
That's right. And what really struck Mander was how complex the issue actually was.
Hmm.
This deep spiritual connection the Hopi people had to the land, the environmental concerns, the cultural clashes. It was so multifaceted.
I bet that's not how it's portrayed on television, though.
Exactly. When he saw the news coverage, it was like a completely different story. That really nuanced, multi-layered reality that he had seen firsthand. It was reduced to this really simple progress versus tradition kind of narrative, all packaged up neatly in like a 2-minute segment.
It's like that saying, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
TV, with its focus on like visuals, sound bites, these easily digestible narratives, it kind of flattens the world, doesn't it?
Exactly. That's exactly the danger that Mander wants us to be aware of. This tendency for TV to prioritize the easily digestible over the truly meaningful, the simple over the complex.
And that simplification, it can have real consequences. It can shape how we understand really important issues. It can influence our opinions.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the news either. But think about the last time you saw, I don't know, a really nuanced portrayal of mental health on TV. Or like a documentary that really went deep to a complex social issue. It doesn't happen very often, does it?
Not really. You're more likely to see those reality shows, all about conflict and drama, or those news segments that just focus on the most sensational parts of a story.
Exactly. So while we might think we're getting a window into the world, Mander argues that we're actually just seeing a very carefully constructed reflection, a reflection shaped by the limitations and the biases of the medium itself.
So what can we do about it? How do we break free from this like mediated reality? It's like we're stuck in that what's it called? Plato's cave, staring at shadows on the wall, thinking it's like, the real deal.
Whoa, that's a powerful way to put it. And Mander, he actually takes this idea even further. He says it's not just about like a content being filtered, right?
Yeah.
But the actual technology of television, the technology itself, has these like built-in biases.
Wait, really? How can the technology itself be
Well,
biased?
think about it. Television, it relies on visual images, right? And images, they're limited by things like resolution, how many frames per second, even the size of the screen.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, literally, we're not getting the full picture.
Exactly. And this limitation, Mander says, it favors some types of content over others. Take violence, for example. Violence translates really well visually. A car chase, an explosion, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Those grab your attention, right? You get that visceral reaction,
Mm-hmm.
even on a small screen.
Yeah, whereas something like, I don't know, a nuanced philosophical debate or a quiet character study, it might not be as like visually exciting, even if it's really interesting on an intellectual level.
Exactly. And then you've got the issue of time. TV shows, they have these strict time limits, right?
Hmm.
Which means complicated ideas often get like squished down into these sound bites.
It's like trying to explain, I don't know, quantum physics in a 30-second commercial. You're going to lose a lot of the details.
Exactly. And this is what leads to what Mander calls the need for highlighted content. Because TV, it has to grab your attention immediately and then hold it, right? So it naturally goes for the unusual, the sensational, the things
Yeah.
that stand out from, just everyday life.
Which explains why we're constantly bombarded with these crazy news stories and reality shows that are all about like, conflict and drama. It's like it creates this feedback loop where we just want more and more of the same stuff.
Exactly. And that constant exposure to these like heightened, exaggerated versions of reality,
Mm.
it can really warp how we see the world. It's
Yeah.
like, that feeling of being in a funhouse mirror. Everything just seems distorted.
And it's not even just about distorting things, right? It's also about what's missing. If TV always prioritizes the loudest, most dramatic stuff, what about the quiet stuff, the subtle things, the things that like take time to unfold?
Mander argues that those parts of life, they just get drowned out by all the noise of television. And this leads us to his critique of TV news, which might surprise you.
Oh, really? I would have thought news would be like exempt from this. Isn't it supposed to be like, objective, just the facts?
You'd think so, but Mander argues that even news is subject to these biases. Think about it. News programs, they have to compete for viewers, right? Just like any other show. They need those attention-grabbing headlines, those dramatic visuals.
So you're saying even the news which we rely on to like understand what's happening, even that's being shaped by like the limitations of TV itself.
Exactly. The need for visuals, the pressure to make complicated things fit into these tiny segments, the constant focus on conflict and, drama. These can all add up to a pretty skewed view of what's actually going on.
It's like we're always getting this, I don't know, filtered, edited version of reality, even when we think we're getting like the real story.
Exactly. And it's not about saying that journalists are, trying to mislead us. It's more about recognizing that the medium itself, television itself, it has these limitations, these biases that shape how information is presented and how we consume it.
So it's not just about being skeptical of what we're seeing, but also being critical of like
Yeah.
the whole structure of TV itself.
Exactly. And that awareness is crucial because Mander says television doesn't just shape how we see the world. It impacts our minds, like how we actually think.
Okay, now we're getting to some deep, deep stuff.
We are. Mander argues that when we watch TV, we're being passive. And that can have this kind of like hypnotic effect. It can actually reduce our critical thinking skills and like our engagement with the actual world around us.
I've totally had that feeling after spending like way too long in front of the TV. Like my brain is fried.
Totally. Have you ever noticed like how you actually feel after watching hours of TV? Mander describes it as feeling drained and used. And he even talks about scientific studies showing that when we watch TV, our brainwaves actually slow down compared to when we're doing more active things, like reading or meditating.
So you're saying our brains actually get slower when we watch TV? That's kind of scary.
It is a little bit unsettling, right? And Mentor actually compares this passive receptive state to, get this, the kind of conditioning that could be used for like autocrat control. Now, he's not saying that all TV is propaganda or anything, but he wants us to see that the way TV is structured, the fact that it can put us in this state of passive receptivity, means it could be used to influence our thoughts and behaviors.
It's like we're being lulled into this state where we're more open to suggestion. Whether it's a commercial trying to make us buy something or like a political campaign trying to get us to vote a certain way.
Exactly. And this leads us to one of Mander's most, I think, radical and thought-provoking arguments. The idea that we don't just watch images, we actually internalize them. We become, in a way, the images we consume.
Whoa, that's a pretty intense thought. Can you unpack that a bit more? So we're not just talking about like copying what we see on TV, right? Like when kids copy their favorite cartoon characters, it's deeper than that. We're saying these images get inside our heads and mess with our values, our beliefs, the whole deal, right?
Exactly. Mander says our brains, especially when we're kids, but really all our lives, they're wired to soak up visual information and then, like, imitate it. We learn by watching and doing what we see. Think about how fast a baby picks up on, like, facial expressions
Yeah.
or gestures. It's incredible.
Oh, totally. They're like, what do they call them? Little sponges, just absorbing everything. And Mander, he's got this funny story about his own kids. After they watched The Towering Inferno, they recreated the whole thing, toy fire trucks and all, running around, fire, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
Funny story, but it makes you think these images, even if they're not real, they stick with us.
Right, and it shows in how we act, even if it's just silly stuff like that.
Right.
And the thing is, we're constantly bombarded with images, especially from TV. It's like they build this world inside our heads, this backdrop, and we use it to understand everything else. Our ideas about beauty, success, even who we are, it's all influenced by these images.
It's like instead of you are what you eat, it's you are what you watch. And if all we're watching is like airbrush models and ripped action heroes, no wonder we feel messed up about ourselves.
Exactly. And here's the really sneaky part. Mandra says this internalizing thing, it happens without us even realizing it. We don't consciously choose to let these messages in. They just seep in.
So it's like this hidden, sneaky influence. No wonder it's so hard to break free from it.
It really is a challenge,
Hmm.
especially when you consider how narrow the range of images on TV actually is.
Yeah.
If we're only seeing this tiny slice of humanity, this limited view of experiences, it's going to create a warped, incomplete view of the world.
Which brings us back to Mander's main point. We got to be aware of these hidden biases in television, how it subtly changes how we see things, how we act, even if we don't realize it's happening. He's not saying TV is evil, just that we should be smarter about how we use it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He wants us to ask ourselves, whose stories are being shown? Whose voices are we not hearing? What messages am I letting in? And how is all of this changing how I see the world?
So where do we go from here? How do we snap out of this, like, TV trance?
Well, Mander has a few ideas, but I think the most important one is this. If we want real democracy, we have to control the technology that's controlling us. And he doesn't just mean government regulations. He means each of us taking responsibility, being active, engaged people, not just passive couch potatoes,
Being picky about what we watch, how much we watch, and, like, really thinking about it.
Exactly. Question everything. Don't just accept what you see on TV. Seek out different viewpoints. Talk to people about this stuff.
Basically, take back control of our attention, our minds, because that's how we understand the world.
Well said. And that's really what Mander's getting at. He's calling us to wake up, to think critically, to be part of shaping the media, not just letting it shape us.
He's given us a lot to think about, that's for sure. All right, listeners, we want to hear from you. What really stuck with you from what Mander said? How do these ideas apply to your life? Join the conversation. Let us know on our website or social media. And until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep those brains engaged.